At the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, a German battleship whose name alone inspired fear in the early days of World War II. The Bismarck, Hitler's state-of-the-art killing machine, heavily armored and massively armed.
There was nothing that we had that could quite match her.
The Royal Navy rallies in a desperate bid to stop her.
Our object was to sink her.
We'll trace Bismarck's deadly maiden voyage, moment by moment, using eyewitness reports from the last remaining survivors and close examination of the mangled wreckage. We'll deconstruct the ultimate battle to sink one of history's most dreaded sea weapons. May the 19th, 1941. The massive Nazi battleship Bismarck leaves Germany, accompanied by the battlecruiser Prince Eugen. Their secret mission, codenamed Exercise Rhine, is to sneak into the Atlantic Ocean and wreak havoc on British and Allied ships. Under the command of Admiral Günther Lutyens and Captain Ernst Lindemann, Bismarck's crew of over 2,000 German sailors begin the maiden voyage of this state-of-the-art supership. May the 21st, 1941. Bismarck and Prince Eugen arrive in a fjord in German-occupied Norway. Before heading into battle, the crew enjoys what will be their last moments of peace and quiet.
It was a beautiful day when we were anchored in that fjord. We were allowed to walk around on deck.
Many of Bismarck's crew are young and inexperienced, thrilled to be on board the brand new battleship they believe is invincible.
I was thrilled. Everyone thought, this ship will never sink. She's so huge, and there are so many weapons.
Bismarck is the embodiment of Hitler's intention to dominate the high seas.
Bismarck was accumulation of all German naval technology at that time. She was the biggest battleship, she was the most powerful battleship, she was actually one of the fastest battleships at that time.
She weighs in at over 53,000 tons and is 251 meters long. Despite her massive size and thick armor, she can cruise at nearly 35 miles per hour. And Bismarck bristles with powerful artillery. Each of her massive 15-inch guns could hurl a small car 22 miles.
The combined firepower from Bismarck, with all 8 15-inch guns firing at once, she could throw a total of nearly 15,000 pounds of steel at her enemy.
German confidence runs high that Bismarck will tilt the sea war in their favor. Little do they know the trials that await their new ship. Morning, May the 21st, 1941. The Bismarck crew awaits orders to launch their secret mission soon under cover of darkness. But they're devastated by what they see high in the sky.
And I wondered, what is that plane doing here? It was a Spitfire, no doubt about it.
A British reconnaissance plane spots the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen, making this now famous photograph. The German plan to keep Bismarck's mission a secret is dashed. The British know that danger is imminent, and Bismarck is a serious threat.
She was something which we all felt in the Royal Navy had to be destroyed, had to be cornered and attacked and sunk.
In 1940 and 1941, the only enemy left for Germany is Britain. Despite suffering badly under German air attacks, the country is still defiant. The Royal Navy controls the seas, but Bismarck is a challenge to their best ships. The British need to find her and eliminate her. On the evening of May the 21st, 1941, despite being spotted by the British, the German ships leave Norway to carry out Exercise Rhine. Before sailing, Prince Eugen tops up her fuel tanks. Bismarck does not, a decision that will later come to haunt the Germans. Some 60 years later, 965 kilometers off the coast of France, an international team prepares to make the first manned dives to the Bismarck. On board the expedition vessel, 2 German veterans of the Bismarck return to one of the most traumatic moments of their lives. Heinz Stieg and Heinrich Kundt are among the very few survivors of Bismarck's fiery end. Only 116 men out of more than 2,200 were rescued.
This brings back long-suppressed memories.
Immer unter Deck gehalten wird, ne?
The submersibles touch down at nearly 4,800 meters. Under powerful spotlights, for the first time since May 1941, human eyes directly gaze on Bismarck's decks. The subs will explore the remains of the massive wreck from bow to stern for up to 12 hours, until low oxygen and power levels force them to leave. Then the team endures a 2-hour ascent, surfacing in the black of night, bringing with them the first high-definition images, evidence that traces the course of Bismarck's final battle. The next morning, on the expedition vessel, Bismarck's veterans begin a virtual dive into the past. Heinz Stieg and Heinrich Kundt confront what's left of the Bismarck.
Fantastic footage.
The images take them back to when a chain of bad luck and wrong decisions would determine their ship's fate. Beginning with Bismarck's hasty departure from Norway. Evening, May the 21st, 1941. Not only does Bismarck not refuel before hurriedly leaving the fjord, but other preparations are also incomplete. 2 reasons may explain the Germans' haste in getting Bismarck to sea. First, the Admiralty hopes the long Arctic nights will cover the battleship's breakthrough into the Atlantic. But by the month of May, nights are getting shorter, and time is running out. Aware of the German attempt to break into the Atlantic, 2 British cruisers keep watch in the Denmark Strait, one of the possible corridors into the Atlantic. On May the 23rd, they spot the German ships.
When Bismarck encountered the heavy cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk in the Denmark Strait, she rapid-fired her main caliber guns at these 2 cruisers. And that knocked out her main radar antenna.
For the first time on her maiden voyage, the mighty battleship roars, but hurts only herself. Hastily installed, Bismarck's forward radar antenna cannot withstand the shock of her own powerful armament. Now her radar abilities are significantly reduced.
This led to the changing of position of Bismarck and Prinz Eugen.
Undetected by the British, the Prinz Eugen, with all her radar installations intact, takes the lead. Meanwhile, British heavy units are drawing closer from the south. The brand new battleship Prince of Wales, and the somewhat mythical flagship of the Royal Navy, the Hood. Launched in 1918, her victorious career earned her the nickname the Mighty Hood.
People felt that the Hood was unsinkable. No ship is unsinkable, but they had this fantasy in their minds.
With the Suffolk and the Norfolk on their heels, the German ships steamed towards the open Atlantic, and their first battle. On board the Prince of Wales, preparation is in full swing.
And we were able to plot the course and position of the Bismarck and work out exactly what time we should be meeting her in the morning. Well, this, of course, was very exciting to know that you were going to have the hell of a battle at, say, 5:30, which, if I remember right, was about the time.
It's 5:35 a.m. when the Prinz Eugen, followed by the Bismarck, detects the two British ships over the horizon.
We thought nothing could happen. The Bismarck is unsinkable, and we will wipe out everything.
Bismarck and the Mighty Hood, two enemy flagships, face off. A duel of giants is about to begin. Only one will survive. May the 24th, 1941. The British battlecruiser Hood and battleship Prince of Wales hold station at the western end of the Denmark Strait, ready to pounce on the Bismarck and Prinz Eugen. The gap between adversaries is closing. The Prince of Wales spots Bismarck.
After a few minutes, one suddenly saw a mast come up, and that was a very exciting moment. The mast was followed by a great big bar. Shortly after that, her funnel began to come up, and gradually the whole of the Bismarck came in sight.
But the British battlecruiser Hood makes a fateful mistake. From a distance, the massive silhouettes of the two German ships look the same.
Hood misidentified Prinz Eugen, which was the lead ship in the German task force, as Bismarck, and Hood was firing against Prinz Eugen, in essence, the wrong target.
Behind the Prinz Eugen, Bismarck readies for action and brings the British ships into her sights. She fires her first salvo against the right target.
It almost immediately straddles Hood.
Even without her active radar, Bismarck's sophisticated aiming systems perform perfectly.
Again, another straddle, so they know they're shooting very well.
And there were huge fountains of water went up from the big shells.
With each salvo, the guns zero in on Hood.
And the ones that went over, passed over us, it sounded like a lot of express trains going over.
On Hood's bridge, Admiral Holland turns towards the Bismarck at top speed. He knows he's got to close the distance to avoid the plunging fire that could put a shell in the most vulnerable part of his ship, the decks. Bismarck steers to optimal firing position to allow both her forward and aft turrets, all her immense power, to fire on Hood.
If you want to score 3 hits, you had to get about 100 shells into the air.
Battleships and battlecruisers are heavily armored along their sides, but the Hood is particularly vulnerable because the armor under her decks is thin. And now she's at the optimal range for Bismarck's plunging fire.
Admiral Holland's on the bridge of the Hood. He's trying to close the gap between him and Bismarck as fast as possible because he knows his ship is very vulnerable to plunging fire.
Bismarck fires again. One of her shells pierces the thin armor right above the magazine, storage for Hood's highly explosive 38-centimeter shells.
And the ship, the Hood, blew up like a great sort of Christmas cracker.
It was a very nasty shock. It was probably the worst shock I had in the whole war, now that I come to think of it.
In a duel that lasted only about 8 minutes, Hood's crew of over 1,400 men vanish in an instant. Only 3 survive.
It made all of us in the Navy feel even more strongly that whatever happened, we must try and get the Bismarck cornered at last.
It's a great victory for the Germans. But during the battle, Prince of Wales strikes a blow that will change Bismarck's fate. A 35-centimeter shell from her main guns rips completely through Bismarck's bow, rupturing a fuel tank and letting seawater rush in. The shell struck Bismarck near the deck and blew a massive exit hole near the waterline on the opposite side. Bismarck's crew becomes aware of the damage, and the far-reaching consequences begin to dawn on the Germans.
About 1,000 tons of fuel was now rendered useless, and so this deprived Bismarck of the valuable fuel that she needed for commerce raiding.
Fuel to conduct her far-ranging mission across the Atlantic. Fuel she could have topped up in Norway when they were still in German-controlled waters. A decision that now proves pivotal.
With the reduced speed, she still could hit, but she could not run anymore.
The damage is severe. The Bismarck is losing fuel, and she can't run at top speed. Admiral Lutyens turns for the nearest port in German-occupied France for repairs. Prince Eugen, with new orders, continues on her own. After only 6 days at sea, Exercise Rhine, Bismarck's first mission to strike Allied shipping, is cancelled. Hitler's trump card, the Bismarck, has tasted her first battle, her first triumph, and the sting of her first wounds. The myth of her invulnerability is fading. For Britain and the Royal Navy, there is now one rallying cry: sink the Bismarck. The German battleship steams towards France, British ships on her heels. Her loss of fuel is a major concern. Bismarck must run at a reduced speed to be sure to make port. The British ships shadow her, maintaining radar contact. A British cruiser zigzags to confuse possible German submarines. On the Bismarck, Captain Lindemann orders a turn to starboard at the same moment that the British ship turns to port. When it turns back, Bismarck has slipped beyond the range of the British radar and disappears from their screens.
Now Bismarck has escaped them. They don't know where Bismarck is.
But Admiral Lutyens doesn't know the British have lost them, because the Germans still receive the British radar signals. The Admiral transmits a lengthy situation report to Berlin.
He thought the British know where I am anyway, so I can send this message without doing any harm. And this was his tragical mistake.
A mistake that had tremendous influence on the hunt for the Bismarck.
During this period, the British were able to lock in on the German radio signal, and they were able to triangulate the signal directions, thereby giving them a position approximately of where Bismarck was.
But where exactly in this vast ocean is the Bismarck? The British send out Catalina flying boats to find her. One of the planes flies for hours, cloud cover obscuring its view. Then suddenly, amazingly, in one patch of clear sky, something appears on the water below.
Yes, it is Bismarck. They've found the Bismarck.
The British have found the Bismarck, but they haven't stopped her. Now the Royal Navy gathers all her forces to close in for the kill. But the Bismarck is almost in safe waters, almost under the protection of the German Air Force.
She had a clear chance to make it to France safely. There was only one chance for the British to stop the Bismarck, and this was by an airborne attack.
Only one ship, the aircraft carrier Ark Royal, has a chance to stop her. Seasoned pilots prepare their Swordfish torpedo bombers for a risky mission. But the weather is deteriorating, and Bismarck is at the edge of her fuel range.
I had my wedding ring under my gloves, and I must say that when I was on the flight deck in the aircraft, prior to starting up, I was feeling it and thinking, well, I hope I'm going to get back from this.
Once in the air, there's no time for emotions. The pilots battle the elements and focus on one single mission: kill the Bismarck.
From about 8,000 feet, we turned towards the ship and started our attack.
The Swordfish are sturdy but slow, a technology from an earlier era. It's like David against Goliath.
They came towards us, ready to defy death.
And then we simply fired with all our guns.
But incredibly, not one plane is shot down. Bismarcks rush into service. Her untrained crew and antiquated anti-aircraft guns now play a devastating role.
The barrels of the heavy anti-aircraft guns, the 10.5 centimeter anti-aircraft guns, could not be trained low enough to fire at the rather slow and low-flying torpedo bombers.
The crew is inexperienced.
We weren't trained to shoot planes that were flying at us.
Otto Hünsch manned a 3.7 centimeter anti-aircraft gun, mounted just above a larger weapon.
I was at the 3.7, and when the 10.5 below me was firing, there was such a big flash I couldn't see my target anymore.
Bismarck is a giant, lashing out in blind fury.
She was also firing her main armament, and we could see pillars of water ahead of us. If we'd flown into one of those, we would have just disintegrated.
The Swordfish pilots deliver their lethal payload.
I estimated that I was at about 90 yards when I dropped my fish. My observer, who looked over the side when we turned away from the ship, could see my torpedo running in the water because it leaves a wake behind it.
One torpedo, maybe Patterson's, strikes the Bismarck in the weakest spot below her waterline, the one place that could disable Bismarck and make her vulnerable. The rudder, her Achilles heel.
And I think that it was just luck that we hit her in that position.
That's when they had us.
The Nazi dream to rule the Atlantic is dashed. On the expedition vessel, memories overwhelm the two Bismarck veterans. Through the underwater footage, they travel once familiar decks, reliving the moments when they knew the Bismarck was in trouble. The giant is crippled. For Bismarck, the run to a safe port is over. One rudder is jammed at an angle. Gale force winds keep Bismarck from turning, forcing her to the north-northwest. All hope is gone. Bismarck drifts, waiting for an attack they know must come soon. Lutyens radios Berlin. Hitler responds.
We received a message from the Führer. The German nation stands behind you. And Lutyens answered, we'll fight until the last shell.
For the pride of the German Kriegsmarine, doomsday is about to come. The British don't know they've wounded the Bismarck, but the battleship's course indicates that something is wrong. They track the ship and are surprised at her heading.
Course of Bismarck, due north. But due north was towards us.
Now unable to steer, the Bismarck can only move in one direction, right into the hands of the Royal Navy.
It meant that what we had prayed for and longed for was about to happen.
From all over the Atlantic, the Royal Navy gathers every available force for one tremendous battle.
Bismarck could fire nearly 15,000 pounds of steel at her enemies. But in this final battle, she was outgunned by a factor of 5. Prince of Wales and King George V could each shoot out salvos weighing as much as 19,000 pounds. The British light cruiser Sheffield could fire almost 2,200 pounds of shells. Rodney could fire nearly 19,000 pounds of shells at an enemy.
And this is just 4 of the British naval forces surrounding Bismarck.
Then we knew, oh boy, now we are done.
Someone said, my wife doesn't know that she'll be a widow soon.
During the night, British destroyers attack the Bismarck. She fires back. There's no damage on either side. On board, the crew is worn out and morale is desperately low. They wait for the end.
You didn't know exactly how and when, but you knew it was coming.
The British decide the end will come the next morning. (8:45 a.m., May the 27th, 1941. Ready for combat, the feared German battleship Bismarck appears out of the fog.
I don't know what color she was, but she looked to me black, and therefore very sinister and very formidable.
The myth of Bismarck's power is about to be shattered.
8:47 a.m., Rodney opens fire.
Immediately, the Bismarck returns the fire.
But the great battleship moves slowly. Unable to maneuver, she is an easy target. The first shell strikes Bismarck at 8:59, 12 minutes into the battle. Sets the foredeck on fire and disables the 2 forward turrets.
Soon they're taking hit after hit after hit.
A shell from Norfolk hits the fire control station on the foretop.
They hit that very early on, and therefore her gun control was not efficient after the first few minutes. And that is when they switched to the after control, and that didn't last very long either. That really finished the Bismarck, because after that they could only fire their big turrets in local control, which is very inefficient compared to director control.
Each of Bismarck's main rear guns now uses its own rangefinder to aim. They fire at will, but they are ineffective. Shells continue to pound the Bismarck. Over 4,700 meters down, ripped and twisted steel is evidence of the damage. The fire control stations were blown completely off the ship. Shells smashed into the hangars and the catapult for the Arado 196 aircraft. The catapult never launched any of the planes. The hangars are still there, but the planes were incinerated in the inferno that consumed Bismarck. The superheated steel released carbon, food for bacteria in the deep sea. They're literally eating the wreck, creating these eerie icicle-like formations called rusticles. Only one of the forward turrets, named Anton, fires a single round. The British score another decisive hit.
Bismarck's A turret is now out of action. Suddenly, B turret is also out of action. There's a huge explosion. The back of B turret is completely blown off.
When another shell hits Anton, shrapnel further damages turret Bruno and kills almost everyone on the exposed part of the bridge. When the ship sank, the heavy turrets fell out of their mounts, leaving these gaping holes. At 9:12, 25 minutes into the battle, shells shatter the bridge, killing the crew. Some believe that Captain Lindemann and Admiral Lutyens died here too. With their main directors knocked out, Bismarck's gunnery crews managed to fire several salvos under local control. Throughout the battle, they concentrate on only one ship.
They're firing at Rodney. They actually managed to straddle Rodney within a few salvos.
But there are no more lucky hits for the Germans. Rodney keeps firing back.
They're hitting Bismarck time after time after time. Bismarck takes numerous hits from all calibers of shells from the British Navy. 16-inch shells, 14-inch shells, 8-inch shells, 6-inch shells, 5-inch shells. They're coming down upon Bismarck non-stop.
The once proud Bismarck becomes a hellish slaughterhouse.
Anti-aircraft guns are just shattering to pieces.
We had orders to seek shelter in the superstructure. I felt that it wasn't safe enough. I was hiding behind Turret Dora, where the empty shell casing usually came out. That's how I realized that the turret was out of action.
Turret Dora is knocked out just before turret Caesar fires its last salvo. Smoke forces the crew to abandon the gun. (9:31 a.m. on May the 27th, 1941. After less than 45 minutes, all of Bismarck's main armament falls silent. But the British continue to fire, their goal to sink the Bismarck. From a distance, the British can see pieces of the Bismarck blasted off the ship with every impact.
Explosions, fire. It's horrible. There's steel shrapnel flying everywhere. The mainmast gets hit and it topples down on top of the ship and falls overboard. One of the cranes gets hit and it falls down onto the superstructure.
A shell explodes in the forward canteen, killing around 200 men.
The decimation for the crew within the superstructure is like nothing that has ever been seen before. The crew are just literally ripped to shreds in a huge meat grinder.
Deep down inside the ship, many young engineers, electricians and radio operators, like Karl Kuhn, remain at their action stations.
I mean, 18 years young. That's when I realized what war is like.
Below the armored deck, they can only imagine the bloodshed and the fires.
Slowly it became clear that we were firing less and less, and that we were being fired at more and more. You feel it, you hear it, that's it. But we didn't know what would happen next.
With Bismarck's guns silenced, the Royal Navy shortens the distance to their target.
The Rodney and King George V closed in closer and closer and closer. So the elevation of their guns, which had started up there, was then down there because they were getting so near.
Rodney approaches the Bismarck at point-blank range for her main artillery. Barely 3 kilometers separate the ships.
They can actually see the explosion with pieces of the ship flying apart, flying into the ocean, landing in the ocean. There's shell splashes all around Bismarck from all the different ships that are shooting at her at this point.
With Bismarck's guns silent, now it's every man for himself. But many of the sailors aren't familiar with the labyrinth deep down inside the Bismarck.
I was panicked, running around, because I wasn't familiar with all those decks, stairways and sections.
They just follow their instincts to go up.
You move mechanically, full of fear.
If you found whatever hole, you'd climb up.
Then I finally saw some light.
When they reach the upper deck, they are shocked.
The steel cars, everything was shot to pieces. There was nothing left intact. It was gruesome. Everything was shaved off.
Piles of dead bodies, an inconceivable sight.
And the British shells keep coming.
The only thing you could do was hide behind the big 38-centimeter turrets when the English were firing and try to save your life. It was an inferno you can't describe. I was standing behind the turret and thought about going down inside again. I wanted to fetch my fiancé's photograph, but I decided not to.
Just like anti-aircraft gunner Hunch, more and more sailors seek shelter behind the D turret.
Here. That's where I got out. And then I was running along this side. Up to here. And then I jumped off.
The British could see sailors leaping into the frigid water.
And as we watched, we saw a little trickle of men. As the first time one had seen the enemy in person, a little trickle of men coming out from the superstructure and running down the side of the ship to the quarterdeck, like lemmings jumping into the sea to escape this inferno aboard.
Hopelessly crippled, the hull rolls on the waves. Yet the ship is not sinking.
The irony to this is the strength of Bismarck. Bismarck was designed to withstand this type of a battle. And even though the superstructure and the guns and these sort of things are being knocked out and blown overboard and blown to pieces, the hull is holding its strength.
Despite their desperate situation, the Germans won't surrender.
No German sailor wants to see his ship in enemy hands.
For decades, there has been one open question. Did the British finish Bismarck off, or did the Germans scuttle her?
Scuttling the ship merely hastened her sinking.
She was a helpless wreck when she sunk, and so it did not change anything whether she was scuttled or sunk by a British torpedo.
The hull is almost intact, but like here, the characteristics of scuttling are visible. The twisted metal of a water-cooling inlet blown open below the waterline.
The British, of course, don't particularly like to admit it because they like to feel that they'd done it all alone, but it wasn't quite like that.
Without the order to scuttle and abandon the ship, many of the crew deep down inside the hull would never have left their action stations.
As the ship was about to capsize, I blew up my life vest and jumped into the water.
The water is frigid, low teens, and full of oil. Pieces of the ship and dead bodies litter the surface. And then Bismarck rolls over.
I could draw it now. It went down like this, vertically, by the bow. And it took maybe 5 minutes.
Bismarck is finally gone. But for hundreds of sailors in the cold water, the struggle for survival begins, adrift on the stormy North Atlantic.
The only thing I wanted was to see my mother again, and the little girl I had then. You don't bother about how and why. You simply want to.
Following naval tradition, the British cruiser Dorsetshire picks up German sailors. Rescue within their grasp, many make a fatal mistake.
They were swimming toward the ship. The waves pulled them back, then smashed them head first against the hull.
The heavy seas hurled some sailors into the side of the ship, head first, knocking them unconscious, certain to drown. For others, moments of luck or ruthlessness decide life and death.
The English sailors were throwing down ropes, rope ends, they say in the Navy. Then, when you were halfway up, you had a comrade hanging on your feet, because he too wanted to be rescued, and you fell down again.
Those who make it remain deeply grateful all their lives.
I must repeat it over and over again. The English were treating us like brothers, despite that they had been firing at us half an hour ago. That's amazing. Hard to understand.
Suddenly, an alarm is raised. U-boat. The presence of a German submarine is never confirmed, but the British make a horrifying decision. To protect her own crew, the Dorsetshire gets underway, leaving hundreds of German sailors to drown in the frigid water.
In the Operation Rheinübung, triumph and tragedy are, in a curious way, in a very curious way, mixed, blended together on both sides.
The Germans' early victory sent a British battleship and over 1,400 men to the sea floor. Yet it ultimately led to triumph for Britain as the Bismarck and more than 2,000 of her crew slipped beneath the frigid Atlantic. The disastrous balance of war.
The loss of Bismarck could have been avoided by canceling the operation from the beginning. Sending Bismarck out with the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen against the odds that they knew existed, against a much superior Navy, the British Navy, was, in my opinion, not a smart thing to do.
History is full of if only this, that, or the other had happened or hadn't happened. That's the course of history.
The Bismarck, Hitler's dreaded state-of-the-art killing machine, defeated after only 9 days at sea and banished forever into the depths of the Atlantic Ocean.